Hi, welcome to the bathtub. We spent a long time on the first part of this, just trying to get our damn parakeet to shut up. I was showing you lots of uninteresting things, like my old ceiling fan, which I wasn't using for years because of Dodo. I've decided it's too hot, too hot. I'm gonna have to use the ceiling fan, which caused a lot of conflict between me and my parakeet. She's very upset. And I hang her thing back up and down, and she's happy for a bit, but then she doesn't even want to play with it. You know how kids are, like they don't want the toy until they can't find it. That's Dodo. Anyway, the premise of this was it's probably I'm probably not doing a particularly good job of explaining it, but that's here, isn't it? That's our show. Is that we're doing books that were considered failures or are considered failures, but which I really liked, and even when I sometimes agree that they are sort of flawed and difficult, screwed up books in a way, I still like them and I want to read them again. I think they're actually really interesting books. Sometimes I think it's totally nonsense that they're failures. Here's another one. Okay, Colin Wilson, very successful as a critic, and he wrote these really weird critical and philosophy books. They're kind of interesting. Mainly, we've talked about them because they're the most optimistic view of life you could think of. I can't think. He's totally optimistic to a completely wacko degree. He's just a spiritual. He's practically a theosophist. This guy. Anyway, he wrote a lot of criticism, and then he wrote. I think this is one of the first science fiction novels he wrote, The Mind Parasites, which we did an episode on. It's a sort of Lovecraftian vision of this sort of there's an evil force on our planet, and then these super mental beings who learn how to fight them. It's a completely screwed up, weird book. I remember when it came out, particularly science fiction people hated this book because they said, that's not really science fiction, that's crap. And it didn't get very good reviews, I don't think. It came out because it had the nice title and it had the nice Bantam paperback. It's a cool book. But it's worth reading. I probably want to read it again. Just someday. If I live to be 1,000, I would definitely read it again. But I'm going to hold on to it. This is my version, Animal Planet. This is a good example where I can think of books that were considered failures, which was... This actually got really good. This is my third novel. My second novel got okay. Most of them got good. This got very good reviews, but it kind of destroyed my career. I had published a couple of novels before this, and the first one had done really well. The second one no one quite understood really. But at the time, because I would quote successful enough, I could write what I wanted, and this is the book I wanted to write, and it is still my favorite book. Animal Planet, which is, they stole the title from, I'm sure they stole it because that stupid TV show came out, the TV station came out a year after this book. But anyway, Animal Planet is my vision of Blairite, Clinton-esque political economy and the treatment of the world. I was right in everything, but the main thing is it's not a political book. It's just about a bunch of people, a bunch of animals and people trying to live in this totally screwed up world. And hopefully they'll continue doing so. Anyway, that's my example. That's why I'm interested in this idea of books that are considered failures. That book's totally disappeared. Here's one of Tom Dish's, maybe Tom Dish's last novel, The Word of God, by our great friends at Tachyon. I didn't follow the reviews on this, but I did talk to several people who just said, well, the book is kind of a mess. And I read it, and I have to say I didn't finish it. It's Tom talking as if he's God. It's a very funny idea. Only Tom Dish could write this book. And it's him reflecting on religion and politics and the world and what a mess everything is, interspersed with all these little fairy tales and religious parables that he's invented. And then going back to him as he's God. Tom Dish is God. Anyway, it's a kind of a messed up book, but I remember people saying, and people I respect, that Tom's last books weren't very good. I think it may be a brilliant book. I want to try it again. So anyway, that's a book I'll definitely try again. And in proof of that, another book that came out about the same time from the great people at Subterranean Press, Tom did 2 short novels, The Voyage of the Proteus, and I think The Proteus Sails Again. They're short novels. Anyway, these came out about the same time, and they're great. I mean, all of Tom's late stuff is great. I mean, his poetry... End Zone is amazing. His online stuff and his last books. I forget the name. I have his last published book of poetry. His poetry I think got better in his last few years, and the stories and the fiction. But he was still great. So it's definitely want to read this again, and it's definitely one I'm not going to get rid of. All right, so we're going through these again. We don't really have a 9 or 10 or 11. We're not going to do the countdown like David Letterman sensibly did it. We're just yapping. Here's another one I like. A lot of people made fun of Flaubert for Bouvard and Pécuchet. We talked about it here, I think, in the bathtub. We did a lot of Flaubert, one of my all-time favorite writers. There's a lot of people who don't like him. I still don't understand that. This is his last novel. He was working on it when he was dying up until his death. I think it was almost finished, who knows. But it's about two bourgeois idiots. They're just idiots. And they go around trying to be experts in everything, and they study chemistry, and they want to become vegetarians, and they want to do, I forget all the crazy stuff they do. And they have all sorts of crazy ideas about the way, they don't really know much. And they're just basically just talking a lot. And there's a funny dictionary at the end, Dictionary of Received Ideas. Basically the idea that people just accept ideas without thinking anything of it. They just accept those ideas. So it's filled with received ideas, received wisdom, unanalyzed truths that people still believe. It hasn't changed. Still a great book. My favorite writer, I guess we've talked about this. My favorite American writer, Richard Yates. Richard Yates. Here's another good example. I'm talking about the failed novel, which was treated as a failure. This was Yates' second novel. He'd had really good, though not quite stunning, success with his first book, Revolutionary Road, which lost the National Book Award to The Moviegoer. I'm sorry, I just reread the movie. It's a boring goddamn book, and the Revolutionary Road is maybe one of the greatest. It's the greatest American novel of the past 100 years. That's how I think. Anyway, he spent years torturing himself, trying to write as good a book. You know, that pressure you have on your second novel. And he was a fairly middle-aged guy. I was about the same age as him, so I know what he felt. And we talked about it when I interviewed him. Anyway, he finally wrote his second novel, Special Providence. It came out in 1965, or I guess that sounds right. 65, this paperback is from 71. It's very much about his relationship with his mother. It was kind of treated like a failure. So this one really got reviewed to death by idiots, and they all say, "Oh, Revolutionary Road, it was okay, but this is not as good." Blah blah. That kind of crap you hear from just idiots. And anyway, it came out, and he wasn't particularly happy with it. It's a lovely book. It's a really lovely book, and it has a big problem in it, which is that he does something that I can't stand almost any time anyone does it, which is he has two stories. He has a kind of frame narrative about a young guy in World War II. I think he's somewhere in Germany, or going house to house trying to deal with some horrible battle, and he gets lost. And it's about being in a war and not being the hero. Only Yates could write that, and just being completely lost and scared. And in the middle of the book, or interspersed in the book, is the story of him as a young boy with his parents and their divorce, and his crazy mother, who was a sculptor, I guess, and just completely a pain in the ass, who was always getting them thrown out of hotels and houses and stuff. Anyway, it's a wonderful book, and it does have that problem. It does kind of lose its way occasionally, but I still love the book. And then it's one of the great novels which was dismissed as a failure, which it didn't deserve. A couple other quick ones. I was going to reread. I'm not a Melville fan. You all know that. I'm not a Melville fan. One of the books he wrote was Attempt Pierre, after Moby Dick, which did not sell as bad as it was. Actually fairly successful when it came out. It did fairly well for a novel. But anyway, everyone thought he was crazy, which he may have been slightly, I don't know. And he wrote this. He tried to write some books to get back into the business, to keep writing. He wrote Pierre, which was supposed to be a parody of romance novels. Don't quote me on this. I read this 20 years ago. And I remember this is the one Melville novel that really kind of caught me. The opening half is almost like Beckett. It's about somebody trapped in this box, being kept prisoner. And you don't really know where you are throughout all. anyway, the first half of the book is a really kind of brilliant, unusual, original book, and then it opens up into a kind of weird. Again, it almost reminds me of a little John Barth for somewhere. It's like a pastiche on all the nonsense popular fiction at the time. Anyway, if you don't like Melville like me, I do want to reread Pierre. Okay, what are we down to? We're down to a couple more. My favorite one, another one of my favorite writers over the years, William Faulkner. Excuse me. Who most of his books, his early books, really were pretty. They didn't sell anything, but he still was successful enough to write books that weren't very successful. So something was going good for old Faulkner, up until his Nobel Prize, when people said, "Who? Faulkner? What?" When he won the Nobel Prize, The Wild Palms. This is often dismissed as a failure book. It's the story. Something I normally don't like. As I said, it's two different stories that are kind of interspersed. One is about a couple. I think they're both married. I can't remember now. Who leave their spouses to run off together, and just live together in sin at the time. I loved the book. I thought it was a beautiful, beautiful book. And then it's interspersed with the story of an old convict. I can't see in prison. I haven't read this in about 10 or 15 years. I've reread this a few times about an old convict who gets out and starts helping a woman who's pregnant. There's a lot of pregnant women in Faulkner. I don't know if you know this or if you care, but he's helping a pregnant woman in a flood somewhere in Yoknapatawpha County. And anyway, I love The Wild Palms. It's one of my favorites. Finally, I think this is going to be my last of this. We've done enough of this. 2 episodes on books that were supposed to be failures. Martin Chuzzlewit. I guess it's probably dismissed as most people dismiss it as one of his worst books. Partly because halfway through it, it's notorious, famous. He was writing this. He wrote this the serial format. I think he did this every 2 weeks, or he would write another big chunk of it, and they'd print that out and send it out. And then at the end of the year, I had the first edition of this. I think I've sold it. They would bind it up after a year or two. Anyway, Martin Chuzzlewit, very very episodic, very strange. I can't remember it very well at all. I think it does have to do with some young guy who's supposed to inherit some estate or something, and he doesn't know it. And anyway, halfway through the book, this is the famous story. They weren't selling. It was not doing very well, like all his earlier crazy. Most of his early stuff is just wacky comic silliness. They really are really. Nicholas Nickleby is just hilarious, and just it is astute in terms of the evils of that Victorian period, but it's at the same time they're just fun, ridiculous books. This one starts to take some things a little seriously. Maybe people lost interest in it. So halfway through the book, he takes Martin Chuzzlewit and he says, well, maybe I'll send him to America. And the second half of the book is set, most of the second half is set in America because Dickens had gone on a trip there. That kind of looseness of the plot really broke in this book. I mean, in Pickwick Papers, you just have guys running around picking up stories from people. You can't really break that premise very easily. But this one, the story kind of loses itself. After this, he was famous for. He really felt he was going to be more careful about his plotting. I think Dombey and Son was next. Anyway, his late books are just the greatest. After this, the great are great. But this is a lot of fun. We read it. I think we did a Christmas episode several years ago in this endless parade of nonsense in the bathtub, and we did it, and we read it for Christmas. I really enjoyed it. I have to say, it was a really good book to read at Christmas. Okay, I think that's going to do it. I was also going to really quickly. Henry Miller, big favorite. Everybody loves Tropic of Cancer. He decided to write this 3-volume autobiography, Sexus, which is just tons of sex. When I was a teenager, it was getting me too excited, and Plexus and Nexus. Anyway, I read the first volume and the first half of the second volume, I think. Anyway, I really liked them. They were all, everyone sort of made fun of these. They were always dismissed as kind of really bad Henry Miller. They're a little less ornate in the beauty of the language and stuff, but they're just energetic anger against stupidity. Anyway, I enjoyed those books, and I do want to read the whole set. Anyway, there's the failures of success, or the success of failures. Never listen to what everyone tells you about what's not a good book. Just take it in the bathtub. The bathtub knows all. The bathtub knows all. Stay safe. Dodo can come back in. Don't worry about her.